I was 14 years old, sleeping in a beat-up Honda while she posted blessed mother photos with her real kids. But when she saw me walk into that wedding on my surgeon husband's arm, karma her hit so hard she collapsed right there on the marble floor. The judge's reaction was everything. Well, let me tell you my story. And don't forget to tell me in the comments section if I did the right thing. If you're just tuning into this channel, please subscribe, give this video a thumbs up, and don't forget to share with your friends and family and tell us where you're watching from. My name is Zainab and I'm 26 years old now. But this story starts when I was 14 and my world shattered in a single evening. I still remember the smell of her jasmine incense burning in our living room when my stepmother Amina delivered the words that would change everything. "I only want my real children living here," she said, her henna'd finger pointing toward the door like I was some stray cat that had wandered in. I stood frozen in the center of the living room, the air thick with the cloying scent of jasmine incense that Amina always burned to mask the rot of her cruelty. "You have 1 hour," she said, checking her watch as if she were timing a roast in the oven rather than the dismantling of a teenage girl's life. Her voice was terrifyingly calm, lacking even the heat of anger, just a cold administrative detachment that chilled me to the bone. "Take what you can carry and leave. This house is for my real children." My gaze drifted to the plush cream sofa where Tund and Diane sat. They were silent, their attention fixed on the television, rhythmically eating slices of ripe mango. Juice ran down Tund's chin, but he didn't wipe it away. He just kept chewing, refusing to meet my eyes. They were old enough to know this was wrong, but young enough to know that crossing their mother was dangerous. They watched me being erased from our family as if it were a scene in a movie that didn't concern them. I wanted to scream for my father, but Ibrahim was deployed overseas, believing his wife was the saint she portrayed on social media. There was no one to stop this. I was 14, small for my age, with my natural hair pulled back in a simple, tight ponytail. My eyes were red from the tears I refused to let fall, burning with a defiance that felt too big for my chest. I wouldn't beg. I knew that begging Amina only made her smile. I marched to the small room at the end of the hall and grabbed my backpack. I had to choose my life in minutes. First, the framed photo of my mother, the glass cool against my palm. I wrapped it carefully in my favorite hoodie. Then, my school notebooks. Education was the only way out, and I wasn't going to let homelessness make me fail. I shoved them in, the zipper straining against the fabric. Everything else stayed. My bed, my clothes, the few trinkets Dad had sent from his travels. They were all casualties of a war I hadn't known I was fighting. When I returned to the living room, Amina didn't even look up from her phone. She was likely already composing a Facebook post about the challenges of raising a troubled stepdaughter. I opened the front door and stepped out into the cooling evening, the darkness swallowing the only home I had known, leaving me with nothing but a backpack and the furious will to survive. My new reality was confined to the rusting shell of a broken-down Honda Civic parked in the shadows behind a shopping center. It was the only shelter I had, a cold metal box that smelled of stale air and the terrifying uncertainty of my future. Every night, I curled up on the back seat, listening to the distant hum of traffic and praying that no security guard would tap on the window to chase me away. My day began in the dark. I forced myself awake at 5 a.m., shaking off the stiffness from sleeping in a cramped ball, to sneak into the nearby gym. The bathroom there became my sanctuary. I washed my face in the sink and brushed my teeth, shivering against the air conditioning, desperate to wash away the feeling of homelessness before the sun came up. Appearance was my armor. I kept my school uniform pristine, obsessively smoothing out wrinkles and spot cleaning stains with hand soap because I had nowhere to wash it properly. I refused to look like the victim Amina wanted me to be. In the dim light of the car, I stared into the rearview mirror, teaching my fingers to move with precision. I learned to braid my own hair, weaving tight, neat protective styles that looked intentional and well-kept, masking the fact that I had no access to a salon or my old hair products. When the sun went down, the Honda became my study hall. I spread my textbooks out on the dashboard, squinting at calculus problems under the weak, bluish beam of my phone's flashlight. My stomach was a constant, gnawing presence, usually complaining about the meager dollar menu meals I rationed to make my few dollars stretch. But I wasn't entirely alone. Miss Sod, the night shift waitress at the diner across the lot, became my silent guardian. She noticed the girl who sat in the corner with a single cup of water for hours. She never asked prying questions, but she would quietly slide a plate across the counter, a burger sent back by a customer, extra fries, or a warm muffin, claiming it was a mistake from the kitchen. I survived on whatever she could sneak me, swallowing the food along with my pride, grateful for the one person who saw me as a child in need rather than a problem to be discarded. My hands were perpetually dry and cracked, the skin roughened by harsh industrial soap from scrubbing floors and washing dishes. Between my 3 part-time jobs, stocking shelves at dawn, cleaning offices at night, and working the register at a convenience store on weekends, I barely had time to sleep, let alone think. Dinner was usually a cup of instant noodles prepared with hot water from a gas station, eaten alone in the driver's seat of my Honda while rain drummed against the roof. The steam fogged up the windows, sealing me inside my small hungry world while I tried to ignore the ache in my back. But the cruelest part of my exile wasn't the hunger or the exhaustion, it was the digital phantom life continuing without me. On the days I didn't have a shift, I sat at the public library computers to do homework, and against my better judgment, I would check social media. There, shining in high-definition pixels, was the lie Amina was selling to the world. While I calculated if I had enough gas to run the heater for 10 minutes, Amina posted carefully curated photos on Facebook and Instagram. I stared at a picture of a family vacation to the beach, Tund and Diane jumping in the surf, their smiles bright and unburdened, while Amina stood in the foreground wearing a flowing white dress. Another post showed an elaborate dinner table set with roast chicken and jollof rice, Tund and Diane seated with napkins in their laps, looking like royalty. The abundance in those photos mocked the styrofoam cup of noodles cooling in my hands. The captions were the sharpest knives. Under a selfie of her smiling benevolently, she wrote long rambling paragraphs about the sanctity of sacrifice and the holy burden of motherhood. "My children are my world," she typed. "I would do anything to protect their peace." The comment sections were filled with hundreds of hearts and praying hand emojis. Friends, neighbors, and church members piled on praise, calling her a Mother of the Year and blessing her for her devotion. "You are such an inspiration, Amina," one comment read. "Your family is so blessed." I sat in the quiet hum of the library, the blue light of the monitor reflecting in my tired eyes, and felt my existence dissolving. I wasn't just homeless, I was being actively edited out of reality. In Amina's narrative, I didn't exist. I wasn't the daughter suffering in a car 3 miles away. I was a ghost, invisible and erased from my own family narrative, while the woman who put me on the street basked in the glow of public adoration. Couldn't comprehend. She meant well, but she didn't understand the survival instincts that governed my life. She watched with confused amusement as I hoarded free granola bars from campus events, stacking them in my desk drawer like gold bars because I never knew when I might not have money for a meal. When she and her friends excitedly planned nights out at sushi restaurants or bistros, I always refused the dinner invitations. "I have to study," I would lie, unable to admit that I couldn't afford a soda, let alone an entree. The library became my fortress. I spent my nights buried in the stacks, hiding from the social life I couldn't afford. It was there, in the dead silence of 2 a.m., that I met Thomas. We were the only 2 survivors of the late-night grind, both exhausted, our eyes red-rimmed from staring at pages, but we were studying for different reasons. I was studying for survival. He was studying for his future. He was a pre-med student, and even in the harsh fluorescent lighting of the library basement, he was charming, wearing an easy smile that seemed to defy the late hour. He stopped by my table one night, not to ask for a pencil or to tell me to be quiet, but simply to connect. His gaze dropped to the table, noticing my worn textbooks, battered second-hand editions with taped spines that I had scavenged to save money. I braced myself for a sneer or a pitying look, the kind I had grown used to receiving. Instead, he simply pulled out the chair across from me. "That chemistry professor is a nightmare, isn't he?" he whispered conspiratorially. "Do you want to study together?" My heart hammered against my ribs. Years of Amina's conditioning screamed at me to run, to protect myself, to never let anyone see the cracks in my armor. But Thomas didn't look at me like a charity case. He looked at me like an equal. Slowly, cautiously, I felt the ice around my chest begin to thaw, and I decided to trust him. I nodded, and for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel so lonely. The vibration of my phone against the library table shattered the quiet of my study session. It was a number I didn't recognize, carrying a military prefix that made my stomach drop. I answered, my hand trembling, and listened as a nurse informed me that Ibrahim, my father, had been injured in combat and was finally stateside for treatment. The news was a physical blow, relief that he was alive, warring with the terror of his injury. I needed to see him immediately. But as soon as I tried to arrange a visit, the gatekeeper emerged. Amina, ever the strategist, intercepted my efforts. She blocked my attempts to reach him, sending me a barrage of venomous messages claiming that Ibrahim doesn't want to see her. She twisted the knife further, telling me that he was ashamed of me, that he believed the lies she had been feeding him for years, that I was the one who had run away, that I was the ungrateful daughter who had abandoned the family, while he was risking his life overseas. A few years ago, her words would have crushed me. The 14-year-old girl shivering in the back seat of a Honda Civic would have retreated into the shadows, convinced she was unwanted. But I wasn't that frightened child anymore. I was a scholarship student who had clawed her way out of poverty, and I refused to be erased anymore. I knew that if I didn't act now, I would lose my father forever to her manipulation. I didn't go to the hospital empty-handed. I spent the night gathering the truth, compiling a dossier of my suffering. I printed out screenshots of the cruel text messages she had sent when I was starving. I pulled the records showing the child support funds Ibrahim had sent, money she stole while I slept in parking lots. I gathered my own documentation of homelessness, from the dates on my car residency to the letters from my school counselor verifying my situation. When I arrived at the military hospital, I wasn't just a visiting daughter, I was a woman on a mission. I walked through the sliding glass doors armed with a folder of evidence, my heart pounding a rhythm of war. Amina thought she could rewrite history to suit her image, but I was about to show my father the unedited, brutal truth. I gripped the folder tight, took a deep breath of the sterile hospital air, and marched toward the elevator. I pushed open the heavy door to the sterile hospital room, the sharp scent of antiseptic stinging my nose. Ibrahim lay propped up against the pillows, looking older and frilier than I remembered, but his eyes lit up when he saw me, until he saw the grim determination on my face. Amina was already there, standing by his bedside like a sentinel, her smile tight and warning. She moved to intercept me, but I sidestepped her false warmth and walked straight to my father. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I placed the manila folder on his lap, my hand steady for the first time in years. "You need to see this," I said quietly. In the sterile silence, I showed Ibrahim everything. I watched as he flipped through the pages, his confusion turning to horror. First were the grainy photos of me living in the car, the cramped back seat that had been my bedroom, the dashboard that had been my desk. Then came the bank statements, the undeniable proof that Amina stole the child support money he had sent for my care, siphoning it away while I went hungry. Finally, he read the printed transcripts of the cruel text messages she had sent me, words that dripped with hatred and rejection. Ibrahim's face crumbled as he realized the truth. The man who had survived combat looked as though he had been mortally wounded by his own wife. He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face, and then turned his gaze to Amina. "I sent money every month," he whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of grief and rage. "I emailed you every week. Where did it all go?" Panic flickered in Amina's eyes. She tried to defend herself, stammering excuses about how difficult I was and claiming she had only been trying to manage the household finances for the real family. She reached for his hand, but he recoiled as if burned. The betrayal was absolute. With a strength that seemed to defy his injuries, Ibrahim pointed to the door. He didn't yell. His voice was a low, dangerous rumble. He ordered her out of the room, banning her from his sight. As she fled into the hallway, sobbing theatrically, Ibrahim reached for the bedside phone. He didn't call a doctor. He contacted his lawyer that same day. The divorce proceedings began immediately, ending her reign of terror with a single phone call. The legal battle was swift, but the restoration of our lives took time. True to his word, Ibrahim worked tirelessly to make things right, ensuring he repays every cent Amina stole from the funds meant for my survival. He transferred the money to my account with a look of profound sorrow, knowing that while the cash could pay off my student loans, money can't restore the lost years. It couldn't buy back the nights I spent freezing in a car or the birthdays I celebrated with a $1 menu burger. Yet, his effort was a bridge being rebuilt, stone by stone between us. With the financial weight lifted and my father back in my corner, I soared. The day finally came when I walked across the stage in my cap and gown, searching the sea of faces until I found him. Ibrahim attends Zainab's graduation when she earns her master's degree in family therapy, his face beaming with a pride that washed away the memory of Amina's insults. I didn't just want a career, I wanted a mission. I used my own scars as a map to guide others, and soon after graduation, I opened a practice specializing in trauma and family estrangement. Every teenager I helped, every family I reconnected, felt like a victory over the darkness of my past. Life was blooming in every direction. While I built my clinic, Thomas was fighting his own battles in the hospital wards. It was a season of exhaustion and triumph as Thomas completes his surgical residency, trading his short white coat for the long one of a surgeon. But he never lost sight of us. One evening, he took my hand and asked me to build a future with him. He proposes with a custom ring, but it wasn't just a diamond. Hidden in the intricate design was a tiny, almost microscopic detail, a design that incorporates a small Honda Civic charm, honoring her survival. He wasn't ashamed of where I came from. He wanted to wear my resilience as a badge of honor. We didn't want a spectacle. We wanted peace. We chose to marry in a small, intimate ceremony, surrounded only by the people who had truly loved us through the fire. The moment the music started, I took my father's arm. The man who had been stolen from me by lies was now the one steadying my steps. We walked toward Thomas together, with Ibrahim walking her down the aisle, tears shining in his eyes, giving me away to a man who promised to never let me go. 3 years of peace had lulled me into a false sense of security, but that shattered in an instant at Sadiq's wedding. Sadiq was Thomas's older brother, and his nuptials were a lavish affair, a celebration of opulence filled with crystal chandeliers and the city's elite. I stood by Thomas, sipping champagne and feeling grateful for the family I had married into, when a hush fell over the entrance. Walking in with the confidence of a queen, Amina appears uninvited. She looked nothing like the woman who had once stood in a bathrobe, throwing my clothes into garbage bags. She was dressed in an expensive gown that shimmered under the lights, dripping in glittering jewelry that I knew had been purchased with her new husband's money. She had found someone else to bankroll her facade, and she was using every cent to look the part of the matriarch she pretended to be. She scanned the room, her eyes locking onto me like a missile acquiring a target. She approaches Zainab with open arms, moving swiftly to ensure she captured the attention of the entire room. Before I could step back or signal security, she was upon us, loudly declaring, "My beautiful daughter, I'm so proud of you," in front of 200 guests. Her voice carried to the rafters, demanding that everyone witness her devotion. She tries to hug Zainab, leaning in with a perfume that made my stomach turn, her voice dripping with false warmth. It was a calculated assault. She was attempting to rewrite history in real time, burying the truth of my homelessness and her theft under a layer of public affection. To the onlookers, it was a touching moment. Several guests recognized her from social media, likely remembering the Mother of the Year posts she had seeded years ago, and believed the performance, smiling at what they thought was a heartwarming reunion between a mother and her successful child. They saw a loving family. I saw a predator moving in for the kill. The air in the ballroom seemed to freeze as Amina lunged for the hug, expecting me to play along with her delusion. I didn't flinch. I simply stepped back, putting a sharp, definitive distance between us, and spoke with a voice that was calm but firm. "Don't touch me." The room went silent. The clinking of silverware and the murmur of conversation died instantly, replaced by a tension so thick it felt suffocating. Amina froze, her arms still outstretched, a flicker of panic cracking her mask. Before she could spin a new lie, I pulled out my phone. I had saved them all, every digital scar she had inflicted. "You want everyone to know our history?" I asked, my voice carrying clearly to the back of the room. "Let's tell them." I began reading Amina's old messages aloud, letting the vile words hang in the perfumed air. "You're nothing without us. Your father never wanted you. You'll die alone and forgotten." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Amina opened her mouth to protest, but I didn't stop. I turned to the guests, recounting being thrown out at 14, forced to sleep in a car while she posted photos of a happy home. I told them about the stolen money meant for my survival and the intercepted communications that kept a deployed father from his child. "That's enough." Amina shrieked, looking around for an ally, but she found none. Instead, a distinguished man in a tuxedo stood up from a nearby table. It was a family court judge in attendance. He looked at Amina with professional disdain and confirmed that these actions constitute child endangerment and financial abuse. The gavel had fallen. The public facade was shattered. Amina's face went white, then a sickly gray as the blood drained from her head. The weight of the truth was too heavy for her to bear. She swayed on her heels, her eyes rolling back, and collapses onto the marble floor. Security escorts her out, carrying the woman who had once thrown me out like trash. I watched her go, feeling the heavy chains of my past finally dissolve. I turned to Thomas, who looked at me with awe and love. I takes his hand, squeezing it tight, and they returned to the celebration. The silence broke into applause, not for the drama, but for the victory. I had spoken my truth, and it has set me free.